He wanted his ex every weekend. I felt invisible in my own home. And then I found a sealed envelope that said, "To be opened only after my death." I packed a single suitcase, booked a one-way flight to London, and the thing hidden in that box changed everything. At the long mahogany table, someone finally said it out loud, "You're useless now." The room went quiet, except for the sound of paper brushing my palm. In my pocket lay a sealed envelope, Richard's handwriting across it. To be opened only after my death. I looked up, no longer invisible. If they thought they could erase me, they hadn't seen what was inside this letter. But first, you need to know how a secret like this ends up in a wife's pocket, on the very night her family tries to cast her out. Because this wasn't mercy, it was strategy. And that envelope? It wouldn't just speak. It would ruin their plan. Before we dive into the heartbreaking family drama, make sure to subscribe to her Betrayal stories and turn on the notification bell. Here, you will always find stories of sacrifice, betrayal, and unexpected turnarounds. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below. Who knows? Maybe the next story will remind you of your own journey. Eleanor was 62, a woman whose hands bore the marks of hard labor, years spent raising children, running a modest bakery to support the household, and standing by a husband who once promised to protect her from every storm. Her world was simple: family dinners, Sunday church, the smell of cinnamon rolls that wafted through her kitchen. Neighbors admired her quiet dignity. Her children, or so she thought, respected the sacrifices she made. Her husband, Richard, came from an affluent family. His mother, Margaret, had always looked down on Eleanor, the outsider who married her son. Margaret was the kind of matriarch whose words cut deeper than knives. To her, Eleanor was never good enough. "She has no pedigree, no inheritance. Just a woman with flour on her hands," Margaret once whispered to a guest, thinking Eleanor was out of earshot. Eleanor never forgot. When Richard fell ill, the atmosphere shifted. Suddenly, whispers of inheritance surfaced at every corner of the mansion. The estate was vast: a countryside villa, shares in the family company, and lands that had been in Margaret's lineage for generations. Eleanor, who had stood faithfully by Richard's side, assumed she would at least be respected as his partner. But in Margaret's eyes, Eleanor was still the maid who had married up. At one tense dinner, Margaret's voice rang across the table. "When Richard passes, this estate must remain in the family. Eleanor, you have no claim. You understand that, don't you?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Eleanor felt her children, Anna and Michael, shift uncomfortably, but say nothing. And in that silence, a seed of betrayal was planted. For weeks, Eleanor replayed that moment. She sat beside Richard's hospital bed, wiping his forehead with a damp cloth, feeding him spoonfuls of soup he barely swallowed. She thought of the decades she had given, the mornings she woke before dawn to prepare his breakfast, the nights she stayed up sewing torn clothes, the sacrifices she made when he invested their savings and lost everything, only to rebuild alongside him. Did none of that count? If you were in Eleanor's shoes, would you speak up at that table? Or would you swallow your pride to avoid conflict? It's a question I want to ask you, dear listener, because many of us, at some point, have chosen silence when we should have demanded respect. One rainy evening, while organizing Richard's documents, Eleanor stumbled upon a sealed envelope hidden in the bottom drawer of his desk. The handwriting was familiar, Richard's careful strokes, but the words on the envelope froze her blood. "To be opened only after my death." Her trembling hands placed it back. She didn't dare open it. Not yet. But something inside her whispered that this letter might change everything. As Richard's health declined, Margaret's attacks grew sharper. You drained him, Eleanor. Look at him now. He could have married someone of his own class. Instead, he wasted his life with you. At times, Eleanor wanted to scream, to throw every memory of sacrifice back into Margaret's face, but she held her tongue. Her children, torn between their grandmother's wealth and their mother's dignity, began to distance themselves. Michael, once her closest ally, started speaking coldly, echoing Margaret's words. Anna, her daughter, still hugged her at night, but her silence at family meetings cut Eleanor deeper than knives. The night Richard finally slipped into unconsciousness, Eleanor sat alone by his side, holding his frail hand. The storm outside rattled the windows, and in her heart, she felt another storm rising. Margaret entered, her black shawl draped like a queen's robe. She looked down at Eleanor with eyes full of disdain. "When he's gone, you'll be nothing," she whispered. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor did not bow her head. She lifted her gaze, steady and unflinching. Something had shifted inside her, and she knew that hidden letter would be the key. Eleanor woke to the antiseptic dawn of day 4. Richard lay still. Machines blinked. She brushed his hair, whispered a psalm, and stepped into the corridor. Straight into Margaret's lacquered armor and the grandchildren arrayed like jurors. "Visiting hours are for family," Margaret said, cool as glass. "I am his family," Eleanor answered. Michael crossed his arms, eyes sliding away. Anna offered a fragile nod that said, "I'm sorry, but I won't fight." A hospital social worker approached with a tablet. "Mrs. Whitaker," she told Margaret, "your durable medical power of attorney is confirmed. We'll limit access to pre-approved visitors." Eleanor blinked. "I hold Richard's healthcare proxy." "Outdated," Margaret replied, producing a crisp copy. "Richard changed it last year. For his own good. You know that feeling when the ground moves and everyone calls it your imagination? If you've been gaslit by a room, you're not alone." Eleanor kept her tone precise. "I'd like to see the original." The notary stamp glinted. Richard's signature stalled one letter early. He always looped the final D twice. Eleanor took a photo. "Take your photo," Margaret murmured, "and take the hint." To the nurse, "Please escort Mrs. Whitaker to the lobby." In the lobby, Eleanor tucked the photo away and found Richard's navy blazer. Habit. She'd brought it back, sleeves pressed. Her hand slid into the inner pocket. Something clicked. A small brass key taped inside, the kind for safety deposit boxes. Beneath it, a receipt from Harrison and Cole Banking. Deposit Box 312, dated 6 months ago. She closed her fist around the key. "Richard, what did you plan?" That evening, Margaret staged a dinner for appearances. The long table gleamed. Grief had not arrived, but greed had taken a chair. "To family," Margaret said, raising her glass, "to preserving what Richard built." Michael's wife, Tessa, smiled too brightly. "And to structure. Some of us have ventures that need capital." Michael smirked. Margaret slid a folder to him. "Sign these. Temporary management rights for the company." "Richard never discussed that with me," Eleanor said. "Richard couldn't discuss anything with you," Margaret replied. "Your anxieties made it impossible." There it was, the sentence that turns a wife into a nuisance. Anna's fingers trembled. "Grandma, maybe we should wait." "Wait for what?" Margaret's gaze sharpened. "For your mother to empty the accounts? Let's be adults." Michael scribbled his name. "Michael," Eleanor said softly, "your father taught you patience." "He taught me to protect the brand," he answered. Margaret turned, sugar over steel. "Eleanor, you brought devotion. We thank you for that. But this next chapter requires competence." She let each word land. "You're useless." Now Eleanor set down her fork. smiled, and said only, "I understand." Margaret moved Eleanor to a guest room to keep things organized. Alone, Eleanor enlarged the proxy photo. The seal sat wrong. The date's ink looked newer than the header. The signature lacked its double loop. She'd balanced ledgers for decades. Marks told stories. This one whispered forgery. She dialed the family attorney, Mr. Lang. "I need the original healthcare proxy and Richard's most recent will," she said. "Not copies. I can't discuss client matters without permission from the executor." "Who's the executor?" A pause. "Margaret Whittaker." "Then record my objection to any changes in the last 12 months. I have concerns about capacity and undue influence." Another pause. Warmer. "Document everything. Photos, dates, witnesses. If there's a bank box, get a certified inventory." Understood. The next morning, Eleanor drove to Harrison and Cole Banking. The clerk examined the key, then her ID. "Box 312 is registered to Richard and Eleanor Whittaker, joint access." The door buzzed. Inside the viewing room, she turned the key. The box slid free. Inside, a manila folder, a pocket journal in Richard's print, and an external drive. On the journal's first page, "For when I can't say it aloud." She photographed the inventory sheet, signed it, and resealed the box. If you were Eleanor, would you read now or wait until your hands stop shaking? Back at the mansion, Margaret guided a valuation appraiser through the gallery. "This," she said, touching a gold frame, "never belonged in a kitchen woman's life." Eleanor passed them and placed a small bouquet on Richard's bedside table, the room she'd been exiled from. "I'm still your wife," she whispered. Anna stood in the doorway. "Mom, Grandma wants to change the locks. She says it's safer. Safety is never a reason to erase someone," Eleanor said. "Michael says you'll make a mess if you don't cooperate." "What do you say?" Anna's eyes wavered. "I'm scared of her." "Me too," Eleanor admitted. "But fear is not a strategy. You always say that. I always mean it." That night, a courier delivered an updated household protocol. Staff to report only to Margaret. Eleanor needed permission to authorize expenses over $200, all keys to be returned. Attached was a photocopy of a revised trust schedule. Eleanor's name missing from items Richard had promised. Eleanor filed every page into a binder labeled, in her neat bakery script, "Temporary Lies." She texted Mr. Lang. Received documents from Margaret. Possible fraud. Meeting? The dots blinked. Tomorrow. Early. Her phone vibrated again. Unknown number. Voicemail transcription. "Leave it to me, Ayashai," man said. "By Friday, the judge will sign the guardianship." She'll have no standing guardianship. A legal cage for Richard and a gag for her. Headlights washed the driveway. Through the glass, Margaret's silhouette crossed the foyer, a document tube under her arm. Eleanor straightened, decades of smallness shedding like an old coat. She walked to Richard's desk and withdrew the sealed envelope labeled, "To be opened only after my death." She lifted the flap. Footsteps approached, the heavy rhythm of a person who believes she owns the floor. "Eleanor?" Margaret's voice floated closer. "What would you do right now?" "Honestly?" Eleanor slid the envelope beneath the blotter, hands steady. "Come in," she said, ready to meet the storm. Margaret entered with her black shawl draped across her shoulders like a crown. Her eyes swept Richard's study and landed on Eleanor as if she were a trespasser, not a wife. "You still cling to that desk," Margaret said, lowering her voice to a hiss. "Richard never intended this house to be your throne. When he's gone, you'll leave." Quietly, Eleanor smiled faintly. "Funny. Richard never told me that. But he did leave me something else." She didn't reveal the envelope. Not yet. Power is timing, and Eleanor was learning. That night, when the house had finally gone silent, Eleanor returned to the desk. She opened the envelope with hands that no longer trembled. Inside was a handwritten letter along with a notarized document. The letter began simply, "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, then I am gone. I know how my mother can be, and how our children may falter under her shadow. Do not let them erase you. You have been the anchor of this family. Everything I own, everything that matters, belongs with you. The bank box contains proof. Protect yourself. I trust you more than anyone." Eleanor pressed the letter to her chest. For the first time in months, she felt Richard's presence, steadying her. The next day, Eleanor sat by Richard's bedside with the journal from the safety deposit box. She flipped to the page marked with his careful handwriting. Box 312, original will naming Eleanor sole executor. Witnessed, certified, copies in journal pocket. She ran her hand over the ink. Richard had known. He had anticipated Margaret's schemes. Eleanor thought of all the years she had been small to keep the peace. She remembered the countless times she stayed silent while Margaret mocked her accent, her modest upbringing, her work-stained hands. She remembered swallowing bitterness so her children wouldn't grow up in a war zone, but silence had never won her respect. And now, silence would cost her everything. If you were in Eleanor's place, I want to ask you, would you confront them now, or wait until the funeral dust settled? Later that afternoon, Eleanor walked into the parlor where Margaret sat with Michael and Anna. An attorney she didn't recognize was reviewing documents on the coffee table. "We're preparing for the transfer of assets," Margaret announced. "Transfer?" Eleanor asked, her voice calm. "Yes," Margaret said sweetly. "The company, the villa, the accounts. All to stay in the bloodline." "I am the bloodline," Eleanor said softly, placing her hand over her heart. Michael shook his head. "Mom, Grandma says Dad signed a revised will last year. It leaves everything under her stewardship until Anna and I are ready." "Is that so?" Eleanor tilted her head. "Then you won't mind if I ask to see the original will filed with Mr. Lang?" Margaret stiffened. "That's unnecessary." "On the contrary," Eleanor said. "It's the only thing that matters." That night, Anna slipped into Eleanor's room. Her eyes were red from crying. "Mom," she whispered, "I overheard Grandma talking to Michael. She said you'll be left with nothing. She called you a guest who stayed too long." Eleanor took her daughter's hands. "Do you believe that?" Anna shook her head. "No, but Michael does. He thinks he has to choose between loyalty and security." Eleanor kissed her daughter's forehead. "Sweetheart, the truth always finds light. It may take time, but it never stays buried." The following morning, Eleanor rose early, dressed in her simplest clothes, and drove to Mr. Lang's office. She handed him Richard's journal, the receipt from the safety deposit box, and photographs of the suspicious proxy. Mr. Lang examined everything with careful eyes. "Mrs. Whitaker, this changes the landscape. The will you've shown me predates any document Margaret may claim. It appears authentic, properly notarized, and it names you as executor with full authority." Eleanor exhaled. For the first time, she wasn't drowning. "But tread carefully," Mr. Lang added. "Margaret will not yield gracefully. Document every interaction. Build your case like bricks in a wall." Eleanor nodded. "I've built walls before. Out of bread, pennies, and sleepless nights. This time, I'll build one out of truth." That evening, when Margaret cornered her in the hallway, Eleanor stood tall. "You're wasting energy," Margaret said, her smile cold. No one will believe you. Eleanor met her gaze. You've underestimated me for 40 years. That ends tonight. She walked past her mother-in-law, leaving Margaret blinking in disbelief. For the first time, Eleanor wasn't shrinking. She was expanding. Later, as thunder rumbled outside, Eleanor sat at Richard's desk once again. She placed the sealed will, the journal, and the key on the surface. Her fingers traced Richard's handwriting in the letter one last time. She whispered, "You gave me the tools, Richard. Now I'll give us justice." Lightning flashed, illuminating her face, no longer the invisible widow, but a woman ready for battle. And in the silence that followed, her phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. "Mrs. Whitaker, we need to meet." I know what Margaret did. Who could it be? An ally? Or another snare in the web? The storm outside had not quieted, and inside the Whitaker mansion another kind of storm was brewing. By the time Richard's funeral arrived, the air between Eleanor and Margaret was as sharp as broken glass. Guests whispered about the tension, how the grieving widow sat in the front row, shoulders straight, eyes dry, while the matriarch, flanked by Michael and Anna, acted like queen of the procession. Every tilt of Margaret's chin, every clipped nod toward the priest, sent a message. I am the true keeper of this legacy. At the luncheon afterward, the weight of performance reached its peak. Margaret stood, crystal glass in hand, her rings catching the light as if to remind everyone who she was. She clinked her glass once, twice, commanding silence. "Richard entrusted me with the family's future," she declared, her voice steady but laced with triumph. "As of today, the estate will be managed responsibly for the benefit of the children." Gasps and murmurs circled the room. Guests leaned in, nodding at one another, already convinced by the familiar authority in her tone. Every eye turned toward Eleanor. Margaret had staged this, public humiliation disguised as dignity. Eleanor rose slowly, not rushed, not rattled. She placed her napkin down with care, then lifted her gaze. "That's a generous speech, Margaret. But it isn't the truth." The clinking of forks halted. Gasps rippled. Margaret's smile froze, her lips twitching into a hard line. "I have here," Eleanor continued, pulling a sealed folder from her handbag, the very one Mr. Lang had handed her that morning. "The only will recognized by the court, signed, witnessed, and notarized. Richard named me sole executor and primary beneficiary. This villa, the company shares, the accounts, they belong to me." The room erupted. Some guests whispered prayers, others exchanged scandalized looks. One neighbor dropped his fork with a clatter. Margaret slammed her glass down, the stem snapping clean. "Forgery! Lies!" From the back row, Mr. Lang stepped forward, his calm voice carrying. "I've reviewed the documents. They are authentic. Mrs. Whitaker holds full legal authority." Eleanor's voice grew steady, cinematic, as if rehearsed in her bones for years. "This villa? It's mine. And you, Margaret, are trespassing." The room went still. Even Michael's jaw dropped. Anna covered her mouth, trembling. But Eleanor wasn't finished. Her hand did not shake as she drew out Richard's leather journal, worn at the corners. Richard documented every conversation in his final year. He feared coercion. He feared you, Margaret. He left evidence in his own handwriting. She opened to a page marked with his neat script and read aloud. "Mother insists I revoke Eleanor's rights." I refused. If she produces a new will, it is false. A collective shiver passed through the guests. Whispers swelled like a tide. How cruel. How shameless. A family friend muttered under his breath, "Good Lord." Margaret's face drained of color. Her hand, still gripping the edge of the table, trembled. And then came the final blow. Eleanor lifted the small external drive from her handbag. Its metallic case caught the chandelier light. This contains recordings Richard made with his physician and attorney. His voice, clear, declaring his intentions. Would you like me to play them now? Margaret lunged forward, desperate, but Michael caught her arm. Grandma, stop. His voice cracked with disbelief. Michael turned to Eleanor. Mom, is it true? You have everything? Eleanor's expression softened. She looked at him not as an adversary, but as her son. I have what your father left me. Not out of greed, but because he trusted me. I don't want to take from you, Michael, but I will not be erased. Anna burst into tears. Grandma told us you were unstable, that you couldn't handle responsibility. Eleanor cupped her daughter's cheek. Do I look unstable to you? Or do I look like a woman who finally stood up? The question hung in the air like smoke, heavy and undeniable. Some of you listening may feel the same sting, being painted weak, when in truth you carried the family for decades. If you've lived that, you are not alone. Margaret's composure cracked. Her mask shattered into rage. This is theft. I will sue. Eleanor's reply was ice and fire. Sue me if you wish. But remember, perjury has consequences. Every forged proxy, every false signature will come to light. And when it does, the judge won't see me as the thief. He'll see me as the wife who endured, who protected her husband's wishes. Margaret staggered back into her chair. The matriarch who once dictated every detail of the Whittaker family now looked small, cornered, diminished before the eyes of friends and neighbors. Guests excused themselves quietly, unwilling to be tied to scandal. A dynasty's mask had been ripped away. That night, Eleanor walked through the halls of the villa alone. The chandeliers glowed not with ostentation, but with quiet triumph. She paused in the study, tracing the spines of books she had once dusted silently, her hand lingering on Richard's leather-bound volumes. Richard, she whispered, I did it. They will never erase me again. She placed his letter back into the drawer, not hidden this time, but locked with her own key, the symbol of her stewardship and survival. The next morning, movers arrived. Their heavy boots echoed against marble floors as they carried Margaret's belongings down the grand staircase. From the balcony, Eleanor watched in silence. Margaret stood in the driveway, clutching her shawl like armor. Her glare was venomous, her pride barely holding together. This isn't over, she spat, her voice shaking. Eleanor's reply was calm, resolute, final. No, Margaret. For me, it's just beginning. As Margaret's car rolled down the long driveway, taillights fading into the rain-soaked horizon, Eleanor knew one battle was won. Yet another loomed. The war for her children's hearts. Because Michael had not forgiven her. Not yet. Would he turn against her completely? Or would the truth eventually set him free? That answer would unfold in the days to come. The Whittaker villa felt different once Margaret's shadow left. For the first time in years, the halls echoed with silence instead of tension. No footsteps of judgment, no icy remarks disguised as advice. Just silence, heavy but healing. Yet Eleanor knew peace would not come instantly. Winning a legal battle was one thing. Healing wounds carved by decades of contempt was another. Michael avoided her. He stayed at the company office late, came home only to sleep, and barely looked her in the eye. To him, she was no longer the fragile mother he pitied, but the woman who had toppled the family hierarchy. He didn't know how to reconcile those two versions of her, and his distance was a wound Eleanor carried quietly. Anna, on the other hand, lingered near her. She drifted into Eleanor's room at night, sat at the kitchen counter while Eleanor cooked, and often watched her with a mixture of admiration and guilt. She was torn between loyalty to her brother and the awe she felt for her mother's courage. One evening, Anna entered the kitchen where Eleanor was kneading dough, something she hadn't done in months. The smell of yeast and flour filled the air, a scent of simpler days before betrayals poisoned the family table. "Mom," Anna whispered, "do you ever regret it? Standing up to Grandma like that?" Eleanor pressed the dough firmly, her eyes steady. "Regret comes from silence, Anna. From letting people steal your voice." "I have no regrets," Anna's eyes welled. "I wish I had spoken up sooner." "You will," Eleanor said gently, brushing flour from her hands. "One day, when the moment comes, you'll speak. And you'll be strong enough." It was a promise not just for Anna, but for every woman silenced by fear. The court hearings that followed confirmed everything. Richard's original will was upheld, the forged documents discarded. Margaret tried to fight, but each attempt crumbled under the weight of Richard's journal, the recordings, and Eleanor's meticulous documentation. The judge's final words echoed in the chamber. "Respect isn't given by blood. It's earned through love and kindness. Mrs. Whitaker, your husband's intentions were clear. You are hereby recognized as executor and rightful beneficiary." In that moment, Eleanor felt justice not as victory, but as vindication. She stood in the courthouse lobby, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, and for a moment she felt Richard's hand on her shoulder, as if whispering, "You made it. You carried us home." But the hardest confrontation wasn't with Margaret. It was with her own son. One night, Michael returned home and found Eleanor waiting in the study. The fire crackled between them, its light flickering across portraits of Richard that lined the wall. "Michael," she began softly, "why won't you look at me?" His jaw tightened. "Because everything changed. Dad's legacy. It should have been mine to protect. Now the world sees me as a pawn of Grandma's greed." "You followed fear," Eleanor said. "I understand." She raised her voice louder than mine for years. "But you are not her. You are your father's son. And he trusted me. Not to keep wealth, but to keep this family intact." Michael's shoulders sagged. For the first time, the anger melted, revealing the boy she once held during thunderstorms, the son who once ran to her when nightmares woke him. "I'm sorry, Mom. I thought you were weak." Eleanor reached across the desk, her touch warm. "I was never weak. I was waiting. And now, I want you beside me, not against me." For the first time, Michael's eyes softened. The fortress of resentment began to crack. Weeks later, the family gathered again, this time by Eleanor's invitation. No lawyers, no notaries, just family. She prepared the meal herself, kneading bread, roasting chicken, and setting the table with care. It wasn't about opulence. It was about home. She stood at the head of the table where Margaret once commanded. But her voice was not sharp. It was steady, tender. "I don't want an empire," she said. "I want peace. Richard left these things to me so I could protect them for you. But property means nothing if we lose each other. I will not repeat Margaret's mistakes. You will always have a place here, not because of blood, but because of love." Michael lowered his head, silent but thoughtful. Anna reached for her mother's hand. And in that moment, the Whitaker family, fractured and bruised, took its first step toward healing. Later that night, Eleanor walked through the garden alone. The moonlight touched the roses she had once planted with Richard. She remembered how he used to kneel beside her, teasing her about digging too shallow, pressing her hands into the soil. Those roses had survived storms, frost, and neglect. Yet here they were, blooming still. She thought of the journey, the insults endured, the betrayal swallowed, the quiet suffering that nearly erased her. But now she was not invisible. She was whole. As she whispered into the night, Her words carried the moral we all need to hear. Respect isn't given by blood. It's earned through love and kindness. If you've ever felt overlooked, betrayed, or silenced within your own family, know this: you are not alone. Like Eleanor, you have more strength than they ever gave you credit for. If it were you, would you have stood up at that funeral? Would you have revealed the will or kept quiet for the sake of peace? Share your thoughts below. Have you witnessed a similar injustice? Inheritance battles, mother-in-law conflicts, or moments when silence cost too much? Your story may give someone else the courage to rise. Here, every story is a reminder. No one has to endure alone. Together, we raise our voices for dignity, fairness, and healing. And if this story touched you, leave yourself a message in the comments, a note of strength, a promise of self-respect. Don't forget to subscribe to Her Betrayal Stories and turn on the bell so you'll never miss the next tale of sacrifice, betrayal, and redemption. Because sometimes stories aren't just stories, they're mirrors. And maybe, just maybe, Eleanor's journey is yours too.